Thank you for joining us today for our session on administering your ArcGIS portal. And just as a disclaimer right from the beginning, the context for what we're going to talk about is really administering your ArcGIS portal with a little p, meaning that it's your portal whether you're in an on-premises configuration or whether you're using ArcGIS Online. We'll refer to it in sort of the generic sense as the portal, right? So everything that we're going to cover today, for the most part, is completely transferable in either environment. And if there's any cases where that's not the case, where there's something unique about one environment or the other, we'll try and point that out. But we really want to talk about administering your portal, your ArcGIS portal in the session. My name is Dan O'Leary. I'm from our product development group. I actually work back in Washington, D.C. with many of our federal government customers, very large organizations who have thousands of users with all kinds of interesting configurations and network security requirements. So we run into all sorts of things and some interesting problems to try and solve. I'm joined today by my colleague Whit from our professional services group, who I think in this very similar way deals with many different commercial entities and organizations with these sorts of WebGIS deployment patterns. So we'll do our best to share some insights today as we go through this and certainly answer questions towards the end, okay? All right, so what we want to do as we talk about this today is really maybe extend the thinking around administering your portal. It's interesting, Whit and I have been doing these sessions for a number of years. And it started out with, you know, what's the best practices for administering your users and for groups and managing items. And all that's still really important, and we'll touch on that today. But as this idea of the WebGIS continues to evolve, and as the technology matures, and as the capabilities of the system become more and more accessible to an entire organization, and not just the GIS people within the organization, it presents new challenges, or maybe it presents new opportunities. So as we talk about administering your ArcGIS portal today, we actually want to sort of talk about some of those different ways of thinking about administration, more beyond just administering users and groups, but how do we really as administrators, and I'll just sort of generally say that term administrator, really like you as the administrator or as an administrator, let's just think about it today as you're the super user, right? You're the person, people in the organization who, you know, others look to for expertise relative to this technology. So as that super user, as the person who's really representing how this technology is used in your organization, we want to present some ideas today for other things that you can think about as that super user for how you can optimize some workflows and do some automation and do some really interesting things with the portal to make the experience of your end users that much better, really. And that's really what it's about, right? As an administrator, as the person sort of responsible for curating and making a healthy portal environment, you're really trying to improve the experience that others are going to have when they're leveraging the portal and the resources and the assets that are associated with the portal. So that's sort of the approach we want to take today as we talk about this. And why is that really important? It's really important because, as you've probably heard, and as I hope you took away from the plenary this morning, this system is evolving, and it's evolving at a rapid pace. So when we think about this, interconnected network is emerging. You've seen the demonstration this morning, a really powerful demonstration of portal-to-portal collaboration. Two portals, two departments in the same organization, two agencies, completely different organizations collaborating, two businesses collaborating together, whatever the case may be. This idea of the portals collaborating with one another, the additional capabilities that you have now with big data analytics and all those other sorts of things. This platform is evolving really fast, right? And that introduces, as we think about it being the super user or the administrator of this system, that puts another level of responsibility on us, right? Because the system becomes larger. There's more interconnected pieces and parts to the system. So the idea of thinking through our administration and optimizing the experience and automating some of these things is a really powerful idea. What's most important, what we really want to hit on today, is this system is a REST-based system, right? So it's a REST-based access system, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But that's the really key thing to think about when we think about automating workflows and scripting administrative tasks and functions with the portal. We're really talking about addressing our web GIS through REST. So that's really what we want to sort of hone in on during this session, and we'll talk a little bit about REST in general and some JavaScript stuff and then some Python stuff, and that's mostly what we'll spend our time on today with Python. Okay, so we don't have a lot of slides. We're not going to do a lot of slideology. We're just going to sort of jump into demos, and we're going to walk through a number of different demos and just show some of these ideas. Okay, sound good? All right, so let's get started. Okay, so when we think about ArcGIS and the web GIS being a REST-based access system, it's the same thing that we use when we build the experiences that you're going to use as an administrator and as your users use as well. So what we see on the screen is the home app. It's the place that administrators come to, and this is where administrators do a lot of their work. I'm not going to bore you with all of the details, but you probably recognize that as an administrator, you have additional and elevated privileges on the system, and things like being able to edit the configuration of the system are provided to you here through the user experience. So when we build the applications like this, we're really talking to the web GIS through REST, okay? That's what we're doing when we build these things. So if I am the administrator and I want to change the default base map group that we're going to use in our organization through the user experience, very simple. I change a drop-down button and I go in and I change the configuration, I save it, and off we go, right? But if we actually look at what's happening beneath the covers, let's go ahead and take another look at that. So what I've done is I've opened up the developer console off to the side. I'm going to just sort of walk through that same set of experiences or workflow that I just did. So again, we're going to change our base map group. I click the drop down. I want to change it to this custom group that I have identified for my organization. And I'm going to save that and get on the right tab. Sorry about that. Let me do that again, so it's more clear. Okay, so what I'm looking at, again, on the right is our developer console. I'm going to change our default base map group. Changed. I'm going to save it. And on the right, you see that a few different REST calls get made by the application to the back-end system. This is what we would refer to as a web service request through REST. Okay? And what happened here is essentially, the application was saying that the user just updated the base map group, and to make the appropriate actions on the back end to update the configuration of the portal so that when our users go to our default base map group, it's there when they're using the web map viewer, right? So really simple context, really simple idea. The point is, as an administrator, when you're thinking about these workflows that you want to automate, these things that you're going to do on a repeatable basis, a great place to start is right in the home app experience. Take a look and see what calls we're making. Take a look and see what sort of parameters are being passed. And you can do that just by, like I did, opening up the developer console. So if we look at that, we look at this page on the header. I know the screens are hard to see, but we can see the actual request that's being made across the network, okay? So we're looking at what was sent out, and then we have a preview of what was returned back to us. So as a developer and writing a script or an application, we start to get an understanding of what's happening within the system. So it's one place to start, right? One place to start. Another great place to start is in the API documentation. We put a lot of time and energy and an amazing amount of work in the API documentation. As we evolve the system, as we talked about, there's more and more capabilities of the system. All of those capabilities are addressable through these REST interfaces through a collection of methods. In the API documentation is where you're going to find all of those things. The documentation is organized in a way that, the same way that you think about your portal, when you think about the web GIS, is a community. It's a number of users. And here's a resource called community. And all of those things that deal with users, like deleting users or having notifications or enabling properties, doing group searches, those community resources are available through that endpoint. And if we look at content, it's the same way, right? So the API documentation is really well done. If you take a look at it, it gives you really great samples and examples. So if I wanted to add a comment to an item, this is the URL that I would use. Notice in the documentation, it's very clear that this is a post-only type of request that I have to make to the system. It gives me the request parameters. It gives me the instruction set that I need to send to the back-end system through my script, and what I should get back as a developer. So documentation is another thing that's really your friend when it comes to thinking about scripting the administration. One more thing I'll share with you is an application that's called Postman. People familiar with Postman in here? Postman is a great application for you to have. It's a Chrome extension, actually. It installs really easily. But essentially what Postman does, I'll just show you. Postman, hopefully you can see this. It's terrible, isn't it? The whole, let's see if I can make any kind of change to this. Yeah, we're just going to have to go with it. I was hoping I could lighten up the view some, but Postman essentially allows you to make REST requests, web services requests, to a back-end system, and it shows you in real detail what's happening, and it shows you the response. So I'll show you an example. So I have a collection of different types of requests that we use inside of the portal. So if I open up this one, this is a search on ArcGIS Online. So again, this is the URL, the sharing, the REST, the search, the parameters that I'm going to pass in. So it's really clear. I can modify these, I can tweak these, I can send this off, and then I get back in my console the details of how the system responded to that query. So if I want to explore before I dig down into my production code or my prototype code, if I just want to explore these endpoints, Postman is a great application where you can just throw a RESTful URL, set the parameters, and off you go. And here's a little bit of magic trick that they use inside of here that's really nice. When you go to set up Postman, you notice that I'm using this environmental variable as what I call GeoServices REST. This is a little configuration in Postman. I'll open up the one that has no password in it. So what this does is it allows you to set a collection of variables, essentially, and then save those, and Postman is smart enough to understand that that's what it uses. So when we think about the system and we think about accessing it through REST, it's a token-based system, so we need to have a valid token in order to interface with the system and get back secured content and all those things. As an administrator, clearly you have the elevated privileges, so you will have your token that's going to give you access to looking at these different things. So in this little Postman configuration, I can set up the username, I can set up the password, and I can set up a variable to hold my token. I put my token in there. I say, oh, whenever I make a request to the system, I just want back the JSON. In this case, I'm asking for pretty JSON, so it looks nice when it comes back. And then if there's ever queries like group IDs and things, I can set all those things as variables. So I don't have to worry about that, like every time go get a new token and all that stuff. So really simple to use, a really great tool to access and to use as a ArcGIS administrator. A couple other real quick things to highlight. Other resources that are valuable as a portal administrator. We do manage this repository in GitHub. It's called AGO-admin-wiki. You'll come here and it's a pretty valuable resource. We do a lot of documentation of the various tools that we provide. So as Esri staff, we often write a bunch of scripts to help us manage our day-to-day, just like you would do. We do things to automate and optimize workflows. We will put a lot of things here inside of this wiki, so it's a great reference to have. Another application, how many of you in here have used this application? Yeah, nice. ArcGIS Online, it's Assistant, great little application. that allows you to jump into your organization or into your portal and do a bunch of things. So as an administrator, there's certain things I might want to do. So I can look at an individual service that I have access to, and I can view the items JSON or whatever it is that I want to do. I can actually even edit the JSON, right? Beware, right? You're making changes to items here, but we can edit a JSON. A really handy tool. Server backend URLs change. We want to change in bulk URLs to items that are running on other servers that are associated with our WebGIS. We can do all of those sorts of things inside of this application. So really handy application to have access to, copying content and things like that. There's also commercial offerings inside of the ArcGIS marketplace. I'll highlight one. Many of you have probably heard of Geojob admin tools. This is the listing for their pro version. They have a pro version and they have a free version. I think they just call it admin tools. A great tool for you, again, to do bulk administration across your organization. They have some really great concepts and capabilities in here. So another resource for you to have access to. And then the last one, actually I'll save this one for later, okay? So I think what we'll do now, I think we're gonna transfer, jump over to WIT. Let me just go back to my slides and make sure we're where we want to be. So we just went through this demo, and I'm gonna turn it over to WIT, and he's gonna talk to us about the ArcGIS Python API and how it can be used for administration.
Thanks, Dan. Can you guys hear me okay in the back as well? Okay, good. So as Dan said, this is a new thing. Did you guys all get a chance to see this a little bit in the plenary this morning? It's a new API called the ArcGIS Python API. We're really excited about it. There's a lot of cool things you can do. Today we're going to focus primarily on administration, but we'll show some of this other stuff, as actually I think what you'll see is some of the analysis capabilities can actually be tied together with administration to orchestrate some pretty cool workflows. So what this API does, if you've come to this session over the last few years, let me stand up a little bit, we've got a podium there. We've showed something in the past called PortalPy, which was something that was similar to the ArcGIS Python API, a very simple sort of Pythonic Python API designed to work with your GIS, sort of from the outside in, working with the portal and your WebGIS. The ArcGIS Python API is the next generation of that idea, and it does go beyond just administration into supporting analysis workflows, as well as publication of content, and sort of moving into the data science realm with some of the things you saw this morning with spatializing pandas data frames. So you can think about this as scripting and automating your WebGIS. I'll go to the next slide. To get a little bit more specific, when we talk about automation, you can automate workflows within your organization. These might be administrative batch type workflows, and we'll show some of those. But they might also be not purely administrative, and tying together the work that's done in different areas of your organization and really streamlining the way that people use GIS. It includes content management, analysis, geoprocessing. And you can kind of see in the middle, there's different ways of interacting with the Python API. You can, of course, use it from the command line, and we'll show a little bit of that. You can build those into scripts that you can run repeatedly, maybe on a scheduled basis. And there's also this really cool thing called the Python Notebook. If you're familiar with this space, they're called Jupyter Notebooks. They ship as part of Anaconda as well, and provides a really nice interactive way of doing analysis and creating scripts using Python in a more visual way. So we'll show some of that as well. But yeah, let's just jump in, I think, shall we? I think the first thing that's maybe one last thing. I know not a lot of slides, we're gonna jump into the demos, but one thing that I think is important to understand as you work with the API is the ArcGIS information model, or what we call the portal information model or the geo information model. And this is broader than just looking at specific services or technology. It's kind of looking at the whole thing, the entire GIS, which really includes three main things. It includes items, which are maps, data sets, feature collections, analysis results. It includes users who have identity, and then it also has groups, which sort of connects users to those items and those information. And then there's roles, and then there's data sources, and lots of other things that sort of tie into this, and you'll get to explore that through the Python API as well. But the Python API is really designed around this information model. So you're not going to be seeing as much like layer files and MXD documents and things like that. We're looking at the entire web GIS. The types of things that you would be interacting with through the ArcGIS Online website or the portal website, for example, that Dan showed. Okay. All right, so let's just jump in. I hope this works okay. I tried to change the color, but it didn't go very well. So we're going to start very simple. This is a command prompt. I have the Python API installed on my machine. I'm just going to enter into Python. So the first thing I do is I import the Python module. So I'm going to bring in the GIS module, or the GIS package within ArcGIS. I'm also going to bring in some passwords. And now I'm ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to my GIS. And before you try hacking my account, you'll notice that those are variables, not strings. So we've now connected to the GIS. So I can start exploring this information model. So I can get the users. So I'm going to grab all the users in my organization. We'll say for each user, let's print out their username. Okay, so these are the usernames of the users in my organization. I can also learn a little bit more about me. So my first name is Whit. My role is an org admin. The amount of storage I'm using in the platform is about 254 megabytes. So I can kind of explore this. I can, as an admin, actually do the same thing with all of the users in my organization. I can do this with groups as well. So let's grab groups. I'm going to print out the title. Okay, these are all the different groups I have in my organization. Pretty small organization at the moment. And I can do the same thing with content. Now, so here what I'm going to do is I'm going to search specifically for content related to Los Angeles. And this will kind of move us into the next demo in just a moment. So if I look at the content we have in here, so these are all the items related to Los Angeles in my organization. So hopefully you could kind of see that. This is probably not how most of you do Python, firing up a console and just starting to explore stuff. So I want to move over now to show you how this looks in the context of one of these Python notebooks. So I'm in a web browser. This is what we call a Python notebook. It's a Jupyter Python notebook. This all comes with the Python API. So it's a pretty easy experience. It uses Conda. I think you saw that this morning to manage all of these packages, and it brings in Jupyter notebooks. It brings in things like pandas to really bring all the tools that you're probably going to want kind of more at your fingertips. So we start off in a similar way here. And I'll bring in my passwords again. And I'm also going to bring in something else here from Python, which you'll see what that looks like in just a minute. Okay, I've got my imports. Now I'm going to connect to my GIS again. So really the same API available. So what's cool is I can just come back here. I had a typo, and I can rerun that step. You can kind of get that experience here. It's pretty nice. I can also learn as I'm doing this. So if I want to figure out what this My GIS thing is, I can just add a question mark, and it brings up the integrated help system, so I can learn more about this object. It also includes IntelliSense. So I want to search for content in LA again. So we're going to say items, and we're going to, I can hit the tab, and now I can see what I have available within my GIS object. So I'll do content.search, and we'll search for LA. And then we can just print this out. And I get, these are all objects, so when I just print them out, it kind of gives a little summary of the object. But this thing that we imported up at the top, this IPython display, is a way of integrating with Python notebooks that presents objects in a more visual way. So instead of just dumping these out as text, I'm going to loop through my items, and I'm going to display the items. And so now I actually get something that looks like what Dan showed in the ArcGIS.com website, a more visual way with the thumbnail, the type, all that of interacting with this content. What's also cool is I can do interactive mapping through this. So I'm going to create a new map over Los Angeles. So it's going to use the default properties of my organization, which has the topographic map as the default, and it's going to create a map for me over Los Angeles. And this is actually an interactive map. And as you'll see, we can actually sort of instrument this through Python. So I want to start adding some content to this. So I've been working with my GIS. That's what I connected to in the beginning. But I mentioned earlier that this API is kind of designed to work from the outside in, which means that not only can I work with my GIS, but I can connect to other GISs and bring things together. So I'm going to connect to the LA GeoHub. I'm just going to connect as an anonymous user. And I'm going to search the LA GeoHub for health-related content. So we'll say health layers, lahub.content.search. We'll do health, and we want things that are feature services. And then for every health layer in health layers, we're going to display health layer. So here it looks like we've got about 10 items. So now this is content coming from LA's GIS, not from my GIS. Now I want to take this high injury network because I'm going to be doing some analysis related to Vision Zero. And I want to bring that layer from LA into my GIS. So we'll say the network is the first of the health layers, and I'm going to just say map.add layer network. Now if I go back up to my map, that high injury network has been added to my map. And I can interact with this. I can click on it, I get pop-ups. You get the whole web mapping experience all embedded within this notebook, which is pretty neat. So here I am kind of mashing up content, which is nice. You can imagine me doing some analysis here to support Vision Zero, which is all about reducing pedestrian and bicycle deaths to zero within cities, in this case, Los Angeles. But part of what I'm interested in is looking at how health and high injury network relate to schools. So we want to make sure that there's no schools in close proximity to this high injury network. So I have a data set on my laptop here, which is a spreadsheet of all the schools in Los Angeles. So we're going to start tying that in here. Data. So I'm going to bring in this spreadsheet, and now I'm going to add this to my GIS. Let's see. Now what it's doing, it's taking this spreadsheet and it's putting it in my GIS. So now it's up there, sort of in the cloud. It's still a spreadsheet though, it's not something I can really interact with. So I want to publish that so I can then add it to my map. So all I have to do is, we'll call this schools. It's going to turn this file into a layer. Now what it's doing up in the cloud, if you will, in ArcGIS Online in this case, or it could be Portal for ArcGIS, it's taking that spreadsheet, it's turning that into a web layer that I can then use to mash up with other content in the context of web mapping. So this will take just a moment, and while that's going, we can just say add. Now if I come back up, oh, there's one thing I forgot about. Let me actually do this here. I forgot. I'm just going to go show you this. If I come, so what it's done is it's created a feature service item in my organization for schools. I can open it up in the viewer. I can do my smart mapping here. I can change the symbology, and then I can save this back. Save this layer. Let me print out the map again. Let's say map. Oh, not sure why that's not showing up, but you can see this schools layer has now been added back to my map. So I can effectively go and combine content that's on my machine with content that's out on the internet and pull that all together. So I know this isn't specifically administration. We'll show another demo where you can kind of see how this will start to tie into administrative workflows as well. Now, chances are as an administrator, you're not going to be spending a lot of time doing interactive stuff whenever a problem happens. You're going to want to create scripts that automate regular workflows that you're doing to make your job easier. So we have a few scripts that kind of do that. We'll just step through those kind of one at a time. Let me clear all the output. So this first script is pretty simple. It's the idea of creating a report of all my users. So the first thing it does is it connects to my GIS. It searches all of the users and then prints out a count of the number of users that I have. There's 10 users. Now what I want to do is actually dump that out to a spreadsheet, because there's another person in my organization that's, they're not going to be running Python or probably even logging into the website. They just want to report in a spreadsheet format of what users are in the organization. So what's going on here, pretty simple Python stuff, creating a CSV file. One thing that's unique here, in addition to just some of the properties of the user, I'm also then, for every user, going back to the system to say, how many items does that user own? How much content does that user own? And then I'm adding that back to the spreadsheet. So if I run this, it'll take just a moment. And then if I go and look at the spreadsheet on disk, you can see I have a spreadsheet that not only has some of the properties of the user, but also the number of items. So that's a pretty simple example of how you can dump out not just some of the information that's readily available through one REST API call, but use Python to sort of go and get other information about the users and aggregate that together. This next script is similar, but it deals with item content. I think one of the things that comes up a lot is, within ArcGIS Online specifically, you have credits, and you use those credits for storage, and you have users that are authorized. You may have some users that are authorized to publish content. And maybe you're seeing that you're burning up a lot of credits, or there's a lot of things happening, and while the administration experience within the website continues to get even better and better with regards to charting and graphing, you might want to run reports to see who are the users that are using the most storage, and just have that run once a day or once a week. So what this script does is it first goes and finds all of the hosted layers within the platform. In this case, I'm connecting to the LA GeoHub, and it's found that there's actually 451 hosted services. It then goes and prints those all out to a spreadsheet, and you can see here it's printing out the layer ID, the layer title, as well as the size. And I could also add the owner to that. Now this script is going to take a little while, because for each of the 451, it's going and finding out from another REST API call what the size is. And it does this in sort of a lazy way, in the sense that every time I ask for layer.size, it's going and making the REST API call that it needs. So that's a little bit of the plumbing of the Python API. It's designed to be very simple. I'm just saying layer.size. Behind the scenes, that's actually making another REST API call. So this is in the vein of reporting, which I think is one category of administrative tasks that I think we and a lot of you probably have to deal with. There's another category which is kind of to do with housekeeping, making sure that the experience that your users have when they're working with working with their GIS is good. And part of that means removing test content that's shared publicly, or making sure that things have thumbnails. So this is a script that goes and finds all of the groups that are public that don't have a thumbnail. So I can see here that there's 3 groups: analyst notebooks, California wildfire response, and field operations. These are all groups that don't have a thumbnail. And the way that worked is I said mygis.search, and I gave it the access is public query. This is standard syntax for searching through ArcGIS. And then I used pretty simple list comprehension here to prune out those groups that actually had a thumbnail. So this problem groups is now groups that don't have a thumbnail. I'm printing that out here, and then I'm going to make a simple call. I have this thumbnail PNG. Basically the idea is a standard thumbnail is better than no thumbnail. So I have a standard thumbnail that I like to use within my organization. I'm just going to go for each of these problem groups. I'm going to call update and give it this default thumbnail. Okay, now if I come back and I rerun this, you can see that they all have thumbnails. So pretty simple script. You can imagine this being applied to lots of other things to help make sure that the content that's in your organization is relevant to users, and they're not distracted by things that look unpolished or unfinished. You can think of this as kind of like front-end housekeeping. There's also an element of back-end housekeeping, which one way of thinking about it is the system is becoming more and more loosely coupled as it becomes distributed. You have web maps, you have apps, those apps have web maps. Those web maps are pointing to layers that represent services. Right? Some of those are coming from your organization, and you're probably doing your best to make sure those are always available to your users. But you might be bringing in services from other organizations, could be partners, could be government organizations, and sometimes those things are down. So you might, as an administrator, want to know what's the status of the services in my organization? What's the chance that a user is going to hit a web map and they're going to get this error message saying this layer couldn't load? You might want to get ahead of that. So this script aims to, help with that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to find all web maps in my organization. For every web map, I'm going to get the JSON for that web map. And I'm going to get the operational layers out of that web map. And I'm going to print out that URL. So you can think of this as pretty basic operation. Web maps are, at a basic level, pointers to services. I want to dump out all of those services. So here we go. It's crawling through the web maps. And you can see all of the different services that are referenced there by way of layers in the maps. Now, a slight variation on that is I'm just going to go and use simple Python HTTP libraries to send a test request to those and see if it's actually up. And basically, I'm adding this little thing at the end here that says whether or not that service is up or not. And you can see that some of these are not up. If I spend a little more time on this, I might have like a little green check mark or a red X, could put that out to a spreadsheet to indicate these are the problem services. Now, as an administrator, I might take manual action at that point. Maybe I don't want to delete those web maps. Maybe I want to programmatically remove those layers from those web maps, but maybe that's not such a good idea. Or maybe I want to reach out to the owner of that service. So those are all different paths I could take with this information, but you can kind of see how this, as a baseline, could be used to help do some housekeeping and make the overall experience for your users even better. So I think with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dan. You've got a couple other things to show. Yeah? Great.
Okay, and you have one more after this,
Yep.
right? Okay, so I'm going to move fast through this one. So again, back to that sort of analogy of automating workflows and doing things more efficiently. So I want to show you an example of that. Again, not explicitly an administrative task, but something that administrators will probably likely end up doing as the system continues to evolve and grow. So this is a simple project working with imagery. So I've connected to, it's not about this app, we'll just sort of give you the context. So I've got an app that works with imagery. I can open up, I have imagery projects that are available to users. So as an end user, I'm assigned to do these imagery projects. So there's a project on bridge construction status. I open up that project. I get some imagery in my view. This application asks me specific questions about this particular image that I'm looking at, and I can draw on the image and do all those other sorts of things. And fundamentally, I can submit this as a package of work. And off it goes, and it's written information back to a back-end service, and that's all part of a workflow, right? So for an end user, really easy. They opened up an application, they opened up a project assigned to them, they did the work, they answered the questions, they sketched on the image, they hit submit. That's all they have to worry about. Well, that thing was organized as an imagery project, as a distinct thing within the portal, okay? Now, so how would you create one of those imagery projects? Well, of course, we provide a user experience to create an imagery project. And in this user experience, you go through, and it's kind of a wizard-driven thing. And that's fine, that's great for some. But now imagine that you had hundreds of these things to do a day, or thousands of these things to do a day, right? The scale of the work magnifies, and now we want to, as super users, we want to automate these workflows and to be able to do this in a more efficient way. So let's take a look at a Python script. So this is a script using the ArcGIS Python for API, or the ArcGIS API for Python. And I've got a script here, and essentially this is going to do all of those things that we were going to do in the UI. It's going to do it in a simple script, and it's going to run through it really efficiently. So let me just change the project title so we can tell at the end. We'll just call this is a 2017 Dev Summit project, right? So we'll change that title, and we'll save that file off. The script that's actually going to run is here. And this script is just essentially going to walk us through, instead of using a UI, it's just going to do it in an automated way. So let's go ahead and launch that script. And it's asking us for the right username and passwords. And off it goes, right? So here it goes. It's running through the script. It's doing a number of things on the back end to include creating feature services for collecting the information from these. It's setting up the project. It's publishing an image service. It's identifying the right image that's going to go. It's doing a whole bunch of things that would take us a lot of work to do in a manual way. And that is complete now, and it's done just that fast and that easy. So again, imagine that I have hundreds of images that I need people to do inspections on each day. When a new image comes in, the Python script can just listen for a change for a file on a disk and automatically run this script and automatically create these items inside of my organization, and they're available to end users. So if we come back to our application, we'll refresh real quick just for safety's sake. We'll go back to our list of projects, and we should see one in here that has something about Dev Summit in its title. Let's see if we can find that. There it is there, 2017 Dev Summit project, right? So that's the result of that script that just ran. I can open up that project. The questions that I need to ask or answer as a user are available to me. The image is available to me. I can zoom in and interact with the imagery and all those other sorts of things. Now, it's really interesting, right, that as a user, as an end user, I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I just come to work. My job is an imagery inspection person, and I have specific tasks that I need to do against this imagery. I need to collect points of information based off of the imagery, whatever the case may be. I can create those in either side of this particular view. And when I do that, I create the features in the system and I submit my answer and off I go, right? So again, automating the workflows and making it a better experience for end users is this idea of the super user idea of identifying those repeatable things that instead of click, 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 we can just automate through this powerful API.
Thanks, Dan. So we have one last demo to show you that I think in some ways kind of ties things together. You can imagine in this scenario that I'm an administrator working for an NGO that supports California in responding to disasters, in this case, wildfires. And I'll be playing the role of both an administrator and an analyst. Those could actually maybe be separate roles. So again, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to my GIS. The work that I'm doing as part of a wildfire response effort is all being managed in a group. So I'm going to find that group, California Wildfire Response, and then I'm going to list all of the items in that group by just calling group.content. So we have a layer in here called Active California Wildfires. I want to take a look at that. So I'm going to create a map, which you've seen moments ago, and then we're going to add that fires layer to the map. Now I can see that there's a couple fires going on here. Now these are active fires. These are probably growing fires. So you can see that they're kind of in forest areas, but I'm most concerned that they're going to grow and potentially impact my critical infrastructure. So I'm going to go get some critical infrastructure, and I'm going to start doing some analysis. The LA GeoHub already maintains some critical infrastructure layers. Here I'm going to grab bridges and structures, but there's other layers that I might go and grab. So I'm connecting to the LA GeoHub again, and I'm finding the bridge and structures layer. You can see it here. And I'm going to add that to my map. And you can see all of the different bridges and structures in Los Angeles. So not immediately next to these fires, but not that far. These fires can grow quickly. So now I'm going to do a little bit of analysis. I'm going to buffer these fires. So we're using a feature called create buffers in the use proximity package, or the use proximity module. Now behind the scenes, this is actually communicating with the analysis services that are made available in ArcGIS Online and that you also have access to through ArcGIS Enterprise. And it's going to take that fire layer and it's going to create a buffer layer out of that. So I have this fire buffers layer. I'm going to share it. And then I'm going to add that to my map. So if I go back, you can see that there are a couple fires here that once buffered do actually start to intersect my critical infrastructure. So I can get that visually, but maybe I actually want the specific bridges and structures that are potentially vulnerable so that I can do something more with it. So there's more analytic tools that are available to do that. There's one called overlay layers, which will take the fire buffers, overlay them with the infrastructure, and it will create a new layer called at-risk infrastructure, which is basically the subset of the critical infrastructure that intersects those buffers. This will just take a moment. There we go. I can share the layer. I probably should have noted, if you haven't worked with these notebooks, it keeps track of the sequence in which you run them. When instead of a 37, you see a little asterisk there, that means that it's actually processing it. Okay, so if I look at the result of that overlay, it did actually create a service for me. So we call this a layer in the context of the ArcGIS information model. At the end of the day, it's actually a service. Now, one thing I could do with that information is I could look at it in a table or chart. And that's where I maybe start using the pandas capability, pandas data frames, to start visualizing that. So all I have to do is query that layer and then grab the data frame off of the features, and now I get this table that has all of the attributes and all of the critical infrastructure that intersect those buffers. And you can see there's 139 rows and 23 columns. Now there's a lot of information there. I don't need all that information, and if I'm going to give this information to maybe the fire chief so that they can go and do something about those critical infrastructures, they probably only care about the name, the ID of the bridge, and maybe a URL to the report if they need to learn more. So that's really easy to do with pandas. I can create a simplified data frame that only has those attributes. And then if I really want to, I can dump that to a spreadsheet. I have my at-risk facilities now. Maybe I format this a little bit, and I can email this to the fire chief and say, these are the bridges and structures that are likely at risk with the way that the fires are going to expand. And the last thing I want to do is actually keep an interactive web map available current with all of the at-risk critical infrastructures. So again, I'm going to create a new map here, and I'm going to add the critical infrastructure to it. So here you can see the results spatially of what we just showed in the table. And you can see that these are the ones that are kind of in proximity to where those fires were. But I've actually gone and created a web map already. This web map represents, at any given point in time, LA County's at-risk infrastructure from wildfires. This is a map that's in my organization. I'm just going to create a web map object from that item. And now what I want to do is I want to go into that web map and replace the at-risk infrastructure layer with the new one that was just created. So that's the layer. I'm going to point it at the new at-risk facilities URL. And then I'm just going to call update on the web map, which basically sends that JSON for the web map back to ArcGIS Online. And now I can view this web map here. And so now this map has the nice canvas base map that I chose when I originally designed this web map. And it has the nice symbology for the bridges and infrastructure. And of course, it's interactive, so I can get all of the attributes. So this was really an analysis workflow. However, what you can kind of imagine here at the end is that this is a script that can run once a day or once a week. And so I've effectively administrated the integration of content from various places, analysis, and put the output back into my organization in a way that there's this one web map that everybody can go to at any given point in time to look at the at-risk infrastructure. They don't know all of this magic that happened behind the scenes, but I've built that into this Python script that can now be rerun on a regular basis. Now this is something you might need to schedule yourself today. Maybe you're not doing this as a notebook, maybe you put it into a Python script and you just have a Windows scheduler run this once a day. But in the future, one of the things that the product team is looking to do is actually have these notebooks as items within the platform and then allow you to schedule and run those within the platform. So you can kind of imagine at some point, this work that I've done, I could actually put this notebook back into the platform and say, run this every day. And now the system is basically keeping itself current with information. So you can kind of see where this will go in the future. So I think with that, let me just turn it back to Dan and we'll go ahead and wrap up.
So we spent a lot of time in this session talking about Python. We showed some JavaScript as well. But the good news around this is, again, REST is your friend, whether you're talking about administering Portal or Saturday afternoon by the pool. REST is your friend, right? So all of this is accessible through any of the development languages that you might choose to use. So really powerful capabilities addressable in the system through this scripting or development concept that you can put to use in your organization to provide a better experience for end users, to make more efficient workflows, and then to keep track of the things going on within your portal so that you're paying attention to those, like what Whit described as the front end and the back end housekeeping items. So I think with that, we'd like to remind you to submit your surveys, please. Use a little app, if you would. As Jim, I think, mentioned this morning, we do review each of those. This is a little bit, as I mentioned in the beginning, we took this one a little bit differently in terms of portal administration and really talked about some of these ideas of administering your system for efficiencies and workflows. So we'd like the feedback that you provide us in the surveys. Thank you again for coming.